Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Breaking the Game show here on the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio. I'm Stephen Gillespie, and joining me is my awesome co-host, Austin Carr. Austin, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing good, Stephen. I'm happy to be back. I'm excited to do this with you again.
Oh, yeah, it's been a long, lonely week without you this past week, but we've had some great guests and tried to fill in the shoes as much as they could. They did great, but I mean, nothing beats, the real deal, right?
Oh, come on. You couldn't even tell I was gone. They did awesome. You did great. Everybody was great.
All righty. Well, I tried, ladies and gentlemen. I tried to give Austin some flowers. But we got a great show lined up for everybody today. We have an incredible guest, and we're going to talk about a lot of really awesome, sports topics, basketball topics. But before we do that, I want to remind everybody that support for Breaking the Game is brought to you by Manscaped, who is the best in men's below-the-waist grooming. Manscaped offers precision-engineered tools for your family jewels. They obsess over their technology developments to provide you the best tools for your grooming experience. Manscaped is trusted by over 2 million men worldwide. You're looking and talking to two of them right now. We have an exclusive offer for our listeners today. That's 20% off and free shipping with the code BTG at manscaped.com. That's BTG at manscaped.com. Awesome. Why don't y'all tell them a little bit something about Manscaped?
It can't get any easier than a 3-letter code to save your 20% and, free shipping. It's awesome products. Like Steven said, they obsess over all the little details, a little bit like we do here on the show with certain things. So it fits well. Steven and I definitely aren't the type of guys that would, endorse something that we didn't believe in. So make sure you go and check it out. It's all great stuff.
Yeah, it's an awesome product and we endorse it. So if y'all are listening to us, we hope and trust that y'all would, trust our decision-making process. All right, but enough of that. Austin, today we have a very special guest.
Yes,
she is the co-host of the Blue Hardwood podcast, the co-host of the Gunshot podcast. She's a contributor for SB Nation, and we are excited to introduce her today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Miss Lauren Gunn. Lauren, how are you doing today?
Thank you for that intro. That was a very nice intro.
We try. I mean, you're our special guest. We try to make you feel like it's your show, and we're just lucky enough to tag along with you here today.
Agreed.
Get that.
All right, cool deal. So, Lauren, before we kind of get going with this awesome list of conversation topics that we have today, I listed off a couple of things that you're involved with, and I just listened to your latest episode of the Blue Hardwood podcast today with Alex Samich, and it was a really great conversation that I heard. We're actually going to be talking about a couple of those pieces today. But before we get into it, why don't you let our listeners and viewers know a little bit about yourself and kind of some of the things that you do?
Yeah, so just to kind of give a little background on me, I grew up going to Mavs games. My family's had Dallas Mavericks season tickets ever since I could walk, really. So I've just always been obsessed with basketball and everything that goes on off the court. As I've gotten older, I find it all very fascinating because it's just, there's a lot more going on than just 48 minutes of basketball. So, but yes, I do write for the Dallas Mavericks SB Nation page. And like you mentioned, I co-host the Blue Hardwood podcast with Brian Zillum. We do live shows on Mondays through the Locker Room app. And then I also co-host the Gunshot podcast with my brother, where we just talk about everything NBA. So fun stuff.
Yeah, it's really cool. Like me and my brother, we love basketball. I don't think that I could have the patience enough to do a show with them. So good on you. I'm sure that y'all have a neat, dynamic in y'all's, sibling relationship to be able to do something like that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, we're very close. So I'm very lucky to do that with him.
Right on. So Austin, we're going to go ahead and kind of get started with our conversations. Okay. Our first one that we're going to be talking about is something that's near and dear to our hearts. We kind of go on little tangents about it every once in a while when something ridiculous happens. What I'm calling conventional sports media coverage. You got your ESPNs, the other 4-letter network, as I like to say, Fox Sports. You got your Ringers and Athletics. They're a little bit better, but we've had a number of incidents lately come up to where it just kind of raises a question, how do we feel about conventional sports media coverage?
Yeah,
right.
So
go ahead, Lauren. I'll let you tell.
No, go ahead.
No, for sure. Go ahead. Guess first. Definitely.
Well, yes, I was just going to say, there are a lot of things, and there's so many different angles you could break it down from, but there are too many things to kind of complain about. And it's when you have that many, so many generalizations or I guess, problems within the way certain things are handled, that's kind of where I get like there are certain things that I just don't read because I'm like I don't really trust where it's coming from.
For sure. I
Go ahead,
definitely
Austin.
agree with everything you just said. I like that you also feel like there's too many things to complain about all at once right now, because I think Steven and I are usually in the same boat there for sure. One of my things is that I'm just bored with and over with is the fact that instead of actually like reporting the important stuff that's going on and talking about the outcomes of games, these conventional media outlets prefer to like create narratives. I feel like they just whatever they think is going to get the most, page clicks it's they're going to push it and they're going to make that the story, whether it is or not. And I think it's kind of sad how much influence it has on certain things around the league, including like all-star voting and things like award races. And just the fact that since the beginning of the season, it was pretty obvious that certain guys were going to get pushed for certain awards no matter what. And it's kind of taken a lot of injuries and a lot of crazy stuff for them to even consider like broadening their horizons. So that's something that I definitely am tired of seeing for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, and one situation that I want to bring up in particular, Lauren, I'm dying to get your take on this, is the whole Kevin Durant versus Shannon Sharp that we saw a couple of days ago. I'm not sure did you get a chance to kind of see what happened between the two of them?
Yes, I did. I did see it a little bit.
Well, so, I mean, you cover the NBA, so you know that Kevin Durant has been labeled one of the more quote-unquote sensitive players within the Fine Association. And Shannon Sharp has he's a former athlete, one of the best tight ends to ever lace him up. So, I mean, he's not only an analyst or what he's labeled as an analyst, right? But he's also a former athlete. So he's used to being scrutinized under the microscope, having things said about him. Well, Kevin Durant and Shannon Sharp kind of got into an interesting discussion, we'll call it, on social media. And it spurred from the fact that on the Undisputed channel, where Shannon Sharp and Skip Bayless talk about, numerous sports topics, kind of like what we do here, Shannon Sharp was seen quoting falsely something that Kevin Durant allegedly had said, and went off and proceeded to kind of provide a little bit of psychology on the character that is Kevin Durant. And Kevin Durant called him out on it. And apparently conversations was had behind closed doors. And eventually Shannon Sharp just kind of bowed out and tried to take the high road and said, hey, I wish you all, nothing but, health and a good season. So, Lauren, after seeing that and kind of listening to me kind of talk through it again, how did you handle that whole situation?
So, first, I want to say I don't typically watch Shannon and Skip. I don't think that I'm necessarily either of their biggest fans. But I did see a lot of the exchange. And my biggest thing is I don't really appreciate when certain people in national media or act like they know everything that's going on with a certain NBA player, or that they know their exact personality, or they can predict their behavior because they just have this inside. And maybe they do have these relationships with these players, but sometimes I feel like there's personal business that is shared, or even just like there will be thoughts that are shared based on someone's situation that's just not it's not their place. And so I kind of felt like that was a little bit the situation with Shannon. I will say I am not a fan of how KD kind of handles his Twitter presence. I'm really, really not a fan of that, whether it's the burners or him just going right back at people. It's when you reach that level of stardom and talent and recognition, it's always going to come your way. You're going to get the hate. It's going to come at you. And you just got to like go do your thing on the court and essentially shut everybody up with how good you are. And he has the capabilities to do that. And so I've never been a fan of him like coming back at people. But like at the same time, I have no idea what it's like being a professional athlete that is known all around the world, constantly getting stuff thrown at. Maybe sometimes you just hit your limit and you want to fire back. So I can't act like I wouldn't do the same thing from time to time because I just don't know what that would be like. But my biggest thing is or I guess let me phrase it this way. One of my biggest pet peeves is when people speak on things that they just don't know about. If you don't know about something, just say, I don't know, or I don't have enough information to speak on that, but maybe this is what I think at a surface level. We don't need to like speak on other people's situations or other team situations or things that we just don't know about.
Yeah, that's fair, Austin. What do you think about how, one, what Lauren said, and then two, how did you kind of digest what happened?
Well, she kind of covered everything exactly how I feel about it, just in terms of, we do, scrutinize the heck out of professional athletes, but at the same time, how many other professional athletes do you see acting this way on social media? At least they're better at hiding it if they are, because KD seems to get himself into these situations constantly. And, obviously either it's not affecting his brand or his bottom line or whatever he cares about at the end of the day, or it's just something that he wants to do that bad. Because I feel like if it was really causing an issue, somebody in his, his little inner circle or whatever would probably have talked to him about, either having somebody tweet for him, or, hey, maybe it's time to go off social media for a little while for the rest of the season here and just worry about basketball. But so obviously he's not too super worried about all the stuff that he's doing on social media. And of it either. It's just weird how much it seems to bother him compared to other people. Like, it seems like it'd be a pretty, awful existence to live your life the way they do in the under the microscope that they do, and care that much about everything everyone on Twitter says. You're never going to shut them up. I mean, look how long LeBron James has been on top of the world in the NBA, and all you hear is half of social media and half of sports media just dog the guy constantly. And it's just how it's always going to be. KD's always going to be in that situation too. So, obviously he has the freedom to do what he wants on Twitter. If he feels like this is something that's not going to hurt him too bad, whatever. I think that thing with Michael Rappaport, that one bothers me a little more, just because, it was private and it wasn't really something that they put out in the public for good reason. But at the same time, anytime you put your name on anything like that, you have to be careful. So I just don't think KD must care a whole lot about what goes on or what the repercussions of it are. He just keeps doing it. And the type of, celebrity and superstar that he is, if it was an issue, it wouldn't continue, I don't think.
That's fair. And I want to kind of point out something that both of y'all talked about. Now, I led in with a conversation about how Shannon Sharp falsely stated something that Kevin Durant had said, and then went to kind of go on this like psychoanalysis of him, if you will. Mm-hmm. And I think because it's Kevin Durant, that it's very easy. It's a very slippery slope that we can talk about. We can revert to that Michael Rappaport incident. We can talk about his burner accounts and stuff like that. And that's fair game, because Kevin Durant, he did that to himself. I'm not going to try to make it seem like he's innocent in all of this.
Right.
But what I would like to point out is the fact that these guys who were on, these daytime sports talk shows and things like that, they're labeled as entertainers. They're called analysis, but they get away with some kind of off the wall stuff for the sake of entertainment. I'm all for anybody. It doesn't have to be Kevin Durant. They could have said it about LeBron James. They could have said it about Michael Jordan. They could have said it about anybody. I'm all for holding these people who hold a lot of influence on the casual sports fan and even some of the more intermediate sports fans, and how they analyze and think about the game. Because when it doesn't matter if it's Stephen A. Smith, Skip Bayless, Shannon Sharp, Max Kellerman, they have a following. That's why they're on TV. So I'm all for those, the analysts or the entertainers, so to speak. I'm all for them being held accountable when they're wrong about something, because it's so easy for us to be like, but they're not in it to be analytical or whatever. Like, okay, then why are they on TV? They have a following. What they say is going to hold some weight to somebody. Someone's going to point at this and be like, see, everything I thought about KD is true because Shannon Sharp just said this.
Right.
I'm all for holding them accountable. And I don't think that you guys were,
Agreed.
I don't think that you guys were denying that at all. I just wanted to speak more towards that side of it, to where people on TV, like, they talk about it a lot. And Lauren, your guest on your last show kind of spoke on this too, that, if we talked about the stuff that fans really needed to hear, like, it wouldn't be so much of a divide between the fans and the people who are on TV, right, Lauren?
Yeah, definitely. And just hearing you say that, like, one of the kind of going back to the whole narratives that are put out about certain players and how that can drive certain things within the league, there are two that immediately come to mind, and I'll try to keep it short. But the Jimmy Butler, how he was just kind of like this locker room cancer, and then when he went to he got on JJ Redick's podcast and they talked about a film session. I'm not sure if you guys ever listened to it, but they talked about a film session where Jimmy Butler was kind of new to the team and everyone was just dead quiet. And he was like, this is kind of weird for a film session. And that he couldn't say anything because he was new on the scene. Like, that's kind of what you do. And so just hearing these different sides and JJ kind of going to bat for him, being like, yes, that was weird. And seeing what Jimmy is doing in Miami as a leader and as a veteran, it's crazy to see how things can just get so twisted and manipulated through the media, because I kind of was like, well, this dude can't stick with a team. Like, there must be something up. I don't know what it is, but it seems like there's something up. But because
I fell for it too.
But it was completely wrong. I was completely wrong. And so I'm just like, you've got to, I mean, that was like one of the biggest lessons I learned just watching that whole situation unfold, because I was like, man, you cannot just take the media's word. You can't just overlook these things. And then I think with Kyrie's another big one where there's a lot said about Kyrie. And I mean, I don't know what's true, what's not, but one of the biggest things I think in this last, maybe it was this last offseason, there was somebody that came out and said he's doing all this stuff off the court and just like named everything that he's doing for his community. And I was like, I would have had no idea. I would have had no idea if that person had never said that, because the media, I mean, Kyrie is he makes a lot of statements, he's very opinionated, but you would have never known that he's doing all this stuff, because the media, I think they kind of like saying, well, Kyrie's this very outspoken guy, like you're either with it or you're not, when in reality we need to also praise the good things that are being done off the court and not just act like they're not happening for the media. I don't like that at all.
Well, a big thing with the whole Kyrie situation is partly that he criticizes the media people. He doesn't answer their questions a lot of times. He makes it hard on them. Then they go and all they do is focus on the stuff that makes him look bad, because, hey, if you're not going to give us a quote or help us get a story, like, you're going to hurt. I guess they have hurt feelings. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree.
Sure. Even to your point about just not following what the media says about a situation with the Jimmy Butler thing, like it led into that free agency when he signed with Miami. The main story was that, Jimmy Butler forgoes winning to get the money and go play on South Beach and have fun. And it turns out now, like a few years later, all we talk about is, boy, Jimmy Butler was the perfect guy for that Heat culture. And it's a match made in heaven. And, look, he really did just want to win. And, he's in a big market now, and he won a lot of games, and he took his team to a lot further than a lot of people expected. And so that became the big story. So it all went away that he was not a good teammate. And it's probably, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. He probably was a little bit too hard on some of those young guys. But at the same time, I mean, he's justified in it if it's for the right reasons, for the good of the team, for having a chance to win. And the media is gonna, like we keep saying, they're gonna spin it how they want to spin it to try to get the most attention from it. And I'm 100% in agreement with you too, Stephen, that people with some kind of influence and voice have to wield it, responsibly. But at the same time, I don't know. I think Fox needs to watch that Shannon and Skip show sometimes, because it kind of makes the whole network seem like a joke at times. I mean, a lot of people like you, like us, like we've talked about, we understand that a lot of what they say is just for ratings and for, views, but not everybody really feels that way. And it just kind of makes the whole network feel like like you said, it's just for entertainment. And it's just not how it really should be. They should cover the actual news that happens if they call themselves analysts and reporters.
Yeah, and that's my thing is, entertainers, they should be held accountable too, because, I mean, heaven forbid, a player does something different, then those entertainers are going to criticize the players. But when the shoe was on the other foot, it just seemed to be like, oh, okay, we're not going to play by the same rules. And I just thought that was interesting. But those are all solid points. And now, Lauren, you're the Mavs expert here. I want to get your kind of preseason thoughts, and as the season has kind of progressed. And I wanted to share this with you live on the show. I didn't tell you earlier, but I'm a part of a group called the NBA Carousel, and I haven't grown up like a Mavericks fan, but I was assigned to cover the Mavericks. So I've been paying a little bit of attention to them this season, more so than I normally do. I try to watch everybody. I'm more of like a fan of the game, but I've been paying a little bit more close attention to the Mavericks. So I want to kind of see if if I'm thinking like you, then I know I'm doing the right thing. So, Lauren, what were kind of your thoughts coming into the season about, kind of your expectations from the successful playoff run, I would say, based on, Luka's timeline and the rest of the team? What kind of preseason expectations did you have? How were they kind of met or not met? And where are you at now with the Mavs season?
Yeah, so coming off of this last offseason, I think the collective feeling amongst Mavs Twitter, Mavs fans, everybody was this group is stronger than it was last year. Like, we have added size and defense, which we did not have last year. Mm-hmm. And I know I think we're going to talk about the Seth Curry stuff in a little bit, so I'll wait for that. But going into this season, in previous seasons, we always trade away our draft picks. We never have draft picks. So to come in with 3 rookies was like, whoa, are we? So I was wondering what they were going to, what their rotation or spot within the rotation was going to look like, if anything. So I was preoccupied with that. And I was also very interested as to how our defensive schemes would change. Because when you have Luka, like, your offense is going to be good. And we knew what we were getting with most of our personnel. The biggest kind of thing that has been really impactful has been Josh Richardson. It hasn't panned out. It's not been good. I really like him as a I don't know him personally, but from what I've seen, how he conducts himself, like, he's a great teammate, great locker room guy. But I just don't know that it's the best fit. And what we expected him to be able to do and bring to the team, he doesn't do on a night-to-night basis. And that is a huge, huge problem, because when you lose the offensive production that Seth Curry brings and the veteran presence that he brings and the playmaker off the bench next to Jalen Brunson, or starter if you need him to be, like, he was this kind of like a Swiss Army knife for us. And so we don't have that anymore. And as much as I like Josh Richardson, and I'm not opposed to keeping him around, but keeping him in the role that he's in with the expectation that he has is not going to work. And then kind of going into this season, it didn't start off so great. We didn't have Porzingis. We had some health and safety protocol struggles. We were missing 5 guys for like 2 weeks. Like, it was just not a good start. And Luka was shooting 9% from the 3-point line. And so it was like, what is this team? I know that was the big question for a long time, was what is this team? Because it's nothing like it was last year. And so I guess kind of as we've gone throughout the season, seeing Luka take different shots, he started starting inside, working his way out. And now he kind of is like, you know what, if we need to go on a run, if we need this, I have no problem scoring at will, like getting right to the cup. And so that's been huge, because sometimes we just need him to step up and do that. And he does it. So they're still figuring out who they are. The relationship between Porzingis and Luka is still continuing to gel. It's not perfect, but I have not given up on it. I'm in that camp. I know a lot of people aren't, but I am. But to me, one of the biggest things that they needed to address at the trade deadline was the fact that we have 0 interior defensive presence, like 0. And they didn't have to. And so that was a big, I don't want to say complaint, but concern that I had. And getting JJ Redick was nice. Like, we needed that. But as far as where this team is at now, they're dangerous because we do have Luka, but at the same time, like, there are certain things that we needed to address, and you can't just will that all to happen at the trade deadline. But this team is not what we thought it would be, and so I think that there are the ways you're going to have to correct that are not going to happen all at once, and you need to be strategic with how you use that money in the future. And by in the future, I mean this offseason and this offseason only, because you've got to make it happen. And you got to correct it all and then some to take you to that next level. So they've got lots of work to do. I know that front office is like, they're going to be busy, but they need to put their money where their mouth is.
Yeah, absolutely. So Austin, we did what we always do, right? We went at every team and kind of gave our analysis, and we were both pretty high on the Mavericks. I believe I was more high on them than you. I actually had Luka as my preseason MVP. I feel like that was the consensus among a lot of people. So Austin, after hearing Lauren kind of break down where the Mavs were last year to this year, do you kind of look at it in a different light, or do you kind of share that same sentiment?
Honestly, my only thing that I really felt needs to be just that you and I have talked about it before more than once, Stephen. They were, as a team last year, they had one of the historically one of the best offenses ever. And it seems like they picked the absolute worst possible time to not double down on something like that, when the rest of the league seems to have kind of mailed it in for most of the regular season on defense. I think a lot of it has to do with the schedule and the short off season and this and that, or whatever you want to say. But in a season where offense is king for sure, giving up some shooting in order to get a couple, enforcers or whatever you want to call those guys to protect Luka Doncic, whatever, didn't really pan out. I think obviously they've gelled recently. They've played a heck of a lot better. I too am not completely given up on Porzingis. I think when he's healthy, that's a 1-2 punch that's extremely dangerous. And it's a kind of a sense of urgency around this whole team regarding when you've got a guy like Luka Doncic, you don't have time for 2 or 3 years to see if a guy works out. You need to put a running mate next to him that he can look at and say, hey, I can go win with this guy. And if it can happen quick that a guy decides, hey, they're not putting the right guys around me, I'm going somewhere else, or I'm not happy, this or that. And then also just I think the whole comments on the play-in thing were just unnecessary, for the simple fact that if they do end up in the 7th seed, even through this play-in tournament, that's a juicy looking 2 right now. If I'm the Dallas Mavericks, it's not the Lakers, it's not the Clippers, it's not the Jazz, who's had a remarkable season. It's the Phoenix Suns, who are good. Obviously, Chris Paul's made a difference on that team, but out of all the teams that I named, I'm a lot less scared of them. I feel like Dallas, could catch them and get hot at the right time and give them at least a 7-game series, if not pull the upset in that series pretty easily. So I think that's a pretty exciting, first round matchup to look for if you're, a Mavericks fan.
Yeah. And I think that's fair. But it's interesting that this season, that the Mavericks care about being the 7th seed, because last season, Lauren, as you remember, they finished as the 7th seed, and they, that was okay. They didn't seem to have a problem with it last year. But now that they've implemented 2 play-in teams, the 7th seed has a little bit more to prove if they fall in that spot. Which, again, the Lakers, they're not healthy. The Nuggets just lost Jamal Murray. It seems like the Mavericks have everything laid out in front of them. All they need to do is just kind of go out and perform, and they can avoid being in that play-in spot. But Lauren, something that Austin and I talked about last playoffs, and we didn't really get to see a lot of it this season to kind of see if it changed that much, really. It seemed like when Luka and Porzingis shared the floor, it looked like Porzingis was out there just enjoying the Luka experience. But when Luka was off the floor, Porzingis was a totally different player. He was more assertive. He was more aggressive. The offense seemed to go through him a little bit more. And what Austin and I talked about, pretty extensively last offseason was that if the Mavericks can sort of find a way to have the offense run through Kristaps Porzingis, like, the Blazers do with Josef Nurkic, obviously the Nuggets do with Nikola Jokic, the Heat do with Bam Adebayo. I mean, the list goes on and on, where you kind of have this horn set where you have, you're big at the elbow, and there's cutting and slashing and things like that going on around him. And I mean, at 7'3", he's got a good vantage point being that tall, right? So you would think that the Mavericks would benefit a little bit more with the offense running through him at the high post and some off action with Luka Doncic. Now, that's not really the glamour way to play basketball. And I think one of the things that the Mavericks have struggled with early on, I think that Luka kind of bought into that preseason MVP hype, kind of like what Russell Wilson did in the NFL this last year, right? Like throughout the season, Luka has kind of changed his game, and you pointed that out yourself, where he's looking for his shot a little bit, he's looking for a better shot selection as the season has progressed. So do you kind of see what Austin and I were talking about with how the Mavericks offense could look like if it wasn't so dependent on Luka bringing the ball up every time?
Yeah, it's hard because the way they stagger Kristaps and Luka, it's hard to. Sometimes there are games depending on the matchup. Like the night Porzingis is going to have is so heavily dependent on the matchup, and that's a problem. Which is why, kind of going back to the idea of what you guys said going into the playoffs, the only teams I don't want to play are Utah, Denver, and the Lakers. Outside of that, I'll take anybody. I really will. And so we just don't have like that. when Porzingis has to match up against a big man if he's the defensive guy, like that's a problem because we're trying to limit those banging opportunities because we can't have him get hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a little bit more slight. And so sometimes like Jonas Valanciunas, like last night, I don't know if you guys watched that game. It's Jonas Valanciunas, one of the most underrated big men in the league. Like you got to be able to. You got to be able to hold your own. Like that guy's no joke, but you got to be able to at least match him, you know? So that's a problematic, but kind of shifting it back to what you guys were talking about with the offensive end. It's really difficult because how we use Porzingis on a night-to-night basis changes so much. And so with Luka, what I've come to learn and what I kind of agree with is that the ball needs to stay in Luka's hands. It does. The problem that I have is when I'm watching the team and nobody's moving. Like you guys said. If nobody's moving, there's no slashing happening, no backdoor cuts. Porzingis is standing in the corner watching Luka, waiting to see if the opportunity will present itself for him to crash for that backdoor lob. Like it's not going to happen every time. So everybody needs to stay moving. And so I would like to see Porzingis, pop out a little bit more. And he does that from time to time. But I do think that there could be a little bit more, like there's a way to have the ball in Luka's hands, but also work through Porzingis more, because I think a lot of Mavs fans will look at the offense and they'll say, okay, we're force feeding it to KP right now. Like we're trying to get him going. And that's like, okay, great. But why don't we just get him in his spots, like run through your sets and get him where he's most comfortable and like let him go to work. Just it's that easy. But force feeding it, whether it's through Luka or through Porzingis, is not. There have been many games where that just doesn't work out. And so my biggest thing is I need to see them staying constantly in motion, especially now that you've gotten JJ Redick. Like that's huge. He's so slippery off the ball. You've got to stay moving. And so that opens a lot of things up for different guys. And I'd like to see them put more of an emphasis on that moving forward. And then as you kind of look into playoffs, like that play-in game, I'm not excited about it because there are way too many games that we lose that we shouldn't be losing. And so that's problematic, and I am nervous about that. At the same time, if we do end up that 7th seed and we are going up against Phoenix or the Clippers, like I'm not going to be mad about that. So you kind of just got to take it for what it is. Like the play-in is happening, and so you need to prepare yourself so you're ready to take care of business when the time comes. We can't be messing around thinking that, we're in this play-in game and we're looking at Phoenix. We need to look at taking out, Golden State, San Antonio, Memphis, whoever it is. And take it one game at a time to put yourself in a position to be successful, because sometimes, I don't know, sometimes I feel like the focus is not where it needs to be. And that's we beat Milwaukee, we beat Utah, but then we lost to Houston and we lost to, who was the other? I can't remember the other one right now, but it was just like, what are we doing here? So that's my thing.
I think a lot of teams would benefit from, focusing on putting their players in their best spots and not just forcing the ball to them and letting them create on their own. I think last year, a lot of the issues that I saw with the Milwaukee Bucks were, why does Giannis have the ball 30 feet from the basket every time, when instead Chris Middleton or somebody else could bring it down, throw it into Giannis, 15 feet from the rim and let him go to work from there. It seems like a lot less work, and a lot less of the defense is going to be focused on that guy, all the time. And Steven, I've said this before and it's oversimplifying it, but when you've got two really good offensive players, there's a really, really nice, simple play called a pick and roll that I really, really like. And I think, it does wonders when you can't figure out how to use two offensive weapons, at the same time. So maybe that's something they should look into a little bit more. I'm sure they do.
I agree with you there. I think, and the thing is that they used to run this double high screen where you would have one guy, it used to be Dwight Powell. You'd have one guy roll and you'd have Porzingis pop, because you don't want Porzingis having the contact down
low. That's the thing.
Those knees.
He's not a attacker.
Exactly. And so it's like, if you want him popping, like he likes to do that, so let him do that. But like keep running that play, because the way our offense is set up, whether it's Tim Hardaway Jr. starting, even Josh Richardson, like he still has the green light. So why are we not still running that with your two wings at the corner, Luka handling the ball? You got one guy rolling, one guy popping, whether it's Maxey, whoever. Like
love Maxey.
Yeah. So I don't know why we don't do that, because do it more as much as we used to, because it was so effective, and it's really difficult to guard when the shooters that we have improved, or how they've improved. Josh is, a little inconsistent, hot and cold, but Dorian, Tim Hardaway Jr., Jalen Brunson, like all solid, reliable shooters. So I think bringing that back could be a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And Lauren, you were kind of talking about this play-in tournament situation. We're familiar with the format, right? Like the 7th and the 8th seed now have to compete against the 9th and the 10th seed. So the way it looks is that the 7th and 8th seed face off. The winner of that game is automatically the 7th seed. So it doesn't matter if it's the 8th seed that beats the 7th, they automatically go in as the 7th seed. Now, if you lose that game, it's the winner of the 9th and the 10th seed. And then, obviously you have to win that game in order to maintain your spot in the playoffs. Otherwise, a 9th or a 10th seed could come in and assume that 8th seed spot. So, with that being said, Lauren, Luka Doncic and Mark Cuban, our guys, we love them. They kind of said some comments that I feel like if the shoe was on the other foot, they would be like, no, the play-in tournament's a great idea. So when you kind of heard Luka Doncic explain why he doesn't like the play-in tournament, does that kind of mindset trouble you at all, or is it just kind of people? I don't want to paint this in a poor light. It could be just like a cultural difference, basically. Like maybe he's just saying, how he really feels instead of having that killer mentality, like bring it on. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
when you heard that, how did you feel about Luka's comments?
Oh gosh, I'm trying to think of the exact words that he used.
So basically, he was like, I don't understand why we have this play-in tournament. So you go in, maybe lose 2 games, and then you're out of the playoffs. I don't get it. I don't understand it. It was along those lines.
Yeah. So when I hear it, I'm with you. My instant reaction was like, okay, if the shoe's on the other foot, if you're the 9-10 seed because maybe you lost a couple of more games in the beginning with the health and safety protocols, or maybe Porzingis had been out a little bit longer, and you need these extra games to prove who you are now as a team, they would absolutely be saying, yay, play in. So it's kind of like, okay, I get it. It sucks when you're on the side of that where you're vulnerable, like you're the one that has to, like, it's tough, or you have more to lose than to gain, I should say. But I kind of just I don't really take away too much from it, because I absolutely believe if the shoe was on the other foot, both of those guys would be all for it.
I mean, does anybody here really think that Luka Doncic doesn't have, enough killer instinct in him to go win a playoff game?
Did you not see the last game, the game winner?
That's what I mean. Like he seems like more than just about any of these young guys that we talk about as the futures of the league to just kind of be built for it. You know what I mean? Like he's kind of been just in the spotlight since he first showed up over here. We hear all the time about these, young basically kids getting signed to professional contracts in Europe. And then by the time they come over here, like some of them have had 4 or 5 years of professional experience, but you're like, you look at the numbers and people don't really know how to translate the numbers from, other leagues to the NBA, because the playing time is different. The amount how long the games are different, and just all kinds of things don't add up 1-to-1. So people see that, his numbers didn't seem that great in Europe, but they've just been, off the charts since he's been here. And so I don't think it's something to really worry about. I do kind of think, like what Steven said, it has something to do with just, he isn't from the United States and doesn't really care if the media knows how he really feels, and because he probably hasn't spent his whole life from AAU on up being taught how to deal with the media and not say a lot without actually saying anything. So it doesn't really bother me. I just I don't think, like you said, it's all situation based. I think if they needed it, they'd love it. And if you don't need it and you don't want it, this is the worst possible season to have it, because the second half of this season has been so jammed together already that any extra games sound awful, I'm sure, to a lot of these guys.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it as well, for sure.
Yeah, and just real quick, I didn't have so much a problem with what Lucas said, but Mark Cuban kind of chiming in, I was like, okay, like this is something that the governors were saying, like it's not fair that teams will tank and then get a chance to get a top draft pick. And so we're going to implement this play-in tournament now, which is supposed to kind of counteract the tanking mentality. And now we have a governor saying, like, I don't know if this is such a great idea all of a sudden. So I don't know. I just thought it was kind of funny. I don't think it holds much weight at all. But Lauren, I just, you cover the Mavs. So I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts and feelings about that. So, Lauren, before we move on to our season favorites, what's your expectation for the Mavericks for the remainder of the year?
So I do expect them to be part of the play-in tournament. I think the closer we get. We do have actually. Let me start by saying this: we have a pretty easy schedule coming up. We've got like 2 games against the Lakers, but outside of that, month of May is like it's golden. And I don't know, say what you will about the Lakers right now. So maybe those are easy games, maybe they're not. But these are winnable games, and so it's Portland. Like we could catch Portland, maybe, I don't know. But Denver is it's so unfortunate to see what I don't know what to think of Denver anymore. Like it changes so much losing Jamal Murray. Like that's huge. And so I don't know what things look like for them as they start to get closer to the finish line. Do they start to rest players a little bit more? Maybe lose a few and maybe we win a few because we're trying to get out of the play-in. I really don't know, but I would say I would expect us to be a part of the play-in. I expect us to come out of the play-in and be either that 7th or 8th seed. And if we go up against Utah, that's tough. But if we go up against Phoenix, like I said, if we go up against anyone outside of LA or healthy LA, Denver, and Utah, I'm picking us to win.
Fair enough. And I agree with a lot of what you said. I'm not so sure about the Phoenix matchup. I do think, with Chris Paul and they have a number of young athletic wing players, but I think maybe that youth could end up biting them in a playoff scenario. So that would actually be an interesting match to see. But like you said, outside of Denver, which without Murray, like maybe that's not as big of a threat now. And obviously a healthy LeBron and AD is scary for all teams, not just in the Western Conference, right? So with that being said, Lauren, I would love for you just to kind of go ahead and share with us who you have as the favorites to make it out of both conferences and ultimately who you think is going to be the NBA champion for this season.
So this is not a question that I love to answer just because I haven't been a huge fan of how the buyout market has played out. But unfortunately, I do think the Lakers will come out, and I also think if they're healthy. And then I also think Brooklyn's going to come out. I will say I have been praying that however this ends up playing out in the Eastern Conference, that you get a Philly-Brooklyn Eastern Conference Finals or a Milwaukee-Brooklyn Eastern Conference Finals, because I think those 2 teams are, if anybody's going to take them out, it's one of those 2. And nobody else. And so like I just don't think Miami can get it done. But I do think Brooklyn will come out because it's just, if they're healthy, like that's so much talent. How are you supposed to beat that team 4 times? I don't think so. So, and then at that point, if it's Brooklyn versus LA, I don't want to kind of like go against LeBron, but I would pick Brooklyn over LA.
That's fair. And I think a lot of people kind of agree with you because, I mean, these are 3 of the best isolation players in the NBA. I just kind of curious, like they get labeled a super team and I understand why, but I mean, it's a super team that's only played 7 games together. So, I mean, I think that takes a little bit of super out of the team there. And, condolences to the rest of the career for LaMarcus Aldridge, because we just found out today that he's retiring due to heart conditions. And, obviously he's choosing the right thing, his health and the safety of himself for his family. Number one thing, he didn't lose sight of that, happy for him. But, the selfish NBA fan of me is going to miss seeing him play, especially this season. So, awesome. What do you think about Lauren's takes on the East and West?
I mean, you can't really argue against them too much. It's solid reasoning behind both teams. Obviously, they're the teams I think just about everybody thinks, if everyone's healthy, is going to be the eventual finals. I personally still like Philadelphia. I think that they've shown a lot of people that they're not just Joel Embiid this year. I think the best thing that happened to them could have been his injury for those couple of weeks, just almost as a mental kind of thing, because for 2 or 3 years, that team hardly ever won a game when he didn't play, and no matter how good they were. And then also just the emergence of Tobias Harris. Tobias Harris really stepping into that second scoring option role ahead of Ben Simmons in terms of offensive, options, I think it makes that team so much better, because he can do more things offensively, I think, than Ben Simmons can or wants to or whatever. And Ben Simmons can kind of just focus on being that, ridiculous lockdown defender that he's been. And we've seen multiple instances where he gets put on the best player on the other team and they get shut down for an extended period of time. I think they've got, obviously, adding Seth Curry has added another dimension to that team that they didn't have, that I think you would probably know what that's all about, Lauren, for sure. I didn't understand that trade when it happened. I've never been a big Josh Richardson fan, of at least of his game. But I just think, Philadelphia's got a pretty good shot to beat the Nets, and it's for the simple reason, like Steven said, 7 games is nothing. Like, if you want to say that the Miami Heat and the Boston Celtics back in the late 2000s, early 2010s were the first super teams, which they weren't, but a lot of people kind of act like that's the beginning of them. Both those teams took a year before they won a title, and they took a lot of bumps along the way, and they played a lot of games together before that happened. And this team absolutely just hasn't played together, and who knows how it'll look with all 3 of them out there. And not having LaMarcus Aldridge is going to hurt them. Like, don't get it wrong. Like, he was towards the end of his career, and he wasn't the offensive threat that he used to be, but he's a big, big, big body inside that you need against a Joel Embiid. And we know how many fouls he draws against people. Like, he's going to get you in foul trouble. And you can't run those small ball lineups that Brooklyn's so deadly in very often with him on the other end, because he'll just keep scoring on you over and over. He'll just keep going to the free throw line. So I think the East, it could be a really, really exciting Eastern Conference Finals. And I mean, anyone that's ever watched our show knows I'm not going to pick against the Lakers. So I won't even go there.
I mean, Lauren, you'll have to forgive Austin. He is a Laker fan. So, everyone has problems. That's his, right?
Right.
So,
right. It has been an issue. I get judged by a lot of people for it, and rightfully so. So,
I mean, it's the most successful franchise in the NBA. So, I mean, you can't really get picked at too terribly hard bandwagon. But anyway,
tough life.
All right. But yeah, I mean, I'm in agreement with you guys, obviously. I don't count out Utah Jazz. I hear a lot of people I hear a lot of people compare them to the Atlanta Hawks and the Toronto Raptors and stuff like that. And I get it, because, they're a smaller market team. They're kind of flash in the pan. They're not always this high or whatever. But Austin, we've talked about this a lot. What separates them from this Atlanta Hawks comparison is they have an absolute go-to scorer in Donovan Mitchell, who can put the team on his back when no one else is hitting. He can go and get them, 4, 5, 6 buckets in a row on his own. They have a really great head coach. They shoot well. They rebound well. They defend well. They have bench presence, which those teams didn't have. I think if you're going to compare them to teams of yesterday, I think the Dallas Mavericks and the Detroit Pistons, when they won championships, are a little bit more appropriate in my estimation. Lauren, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I like that. I do. I actually had a conversation with, I was a guest on a podcast, Utah Jazz podcast called the Home Court Press, and they were comparing previous like underdog winners to this current Utah Jazz team. And we kind of looked at some numbers, like you had Jason Kidd and Dallas, and now you've got Mike Conley, kind of this veteran presence who's having an amazing year with Utah. And then you've got your go-to franchise guy in Donovan Mitchell. But then you've also got Rudy Gobert, who was kind of like a souped up Tyson Chandler, who just, I mean, the Jazz are a tough team. And so while if the Jazz were to go up against the Lakers, I would pick the Lakers. My thing with the Jazz, you cannot discount what they do as a group. Like the numbers, if you don't believe it because maybe the top tier talent or the talent on that team isn't Kawhi, LeBron, Kevin Durant, you can't discount what they do, and it's in the numbers if you don't believe me. And so they're going to be a tough team for anyone to go up against. And so I will absolutely be watching I'll watch every playoff game, but I will be interested to see who they match up with, because they could get a favorable matchup that they might just, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised. Like, I'm not going to pick them. I hate saying this, but there are just certain teams that I wouldn't pick them over, but I wouldn't be surprised if they pulled an upset. I really wouldn't. They've got a lot of really great things going on over there in Utah.
Agreed. They've got health on their side. They got 6 guys that score in double figures. So, and it's in a lot of guys that can shoot the ball, and they're not all going to go cold at once very often. You've got 2 or 3 guys, ready to go if this guy's not scoring like he normally does. And if you really look at it, the Jazz are kind of the perfect prototype team for today's NBA, just on both sides of the ball. They protect the rim. They've got guys that can switch on defense. They can shoot the lights out from 3, and they're great at moving the ball and getting open shots, and they play so well together. I mean, the Spurs teams that beat, that first Miami big three team, just the way they, it's like poetry in motion sometimes. You can't even follow the ball. They're moving it around so quick, and boom, they've got another open three. And they make them at an impressive clip. I've liked to joke, this isn't your dad's Utah Jazz. They're not just out there running a 2-man pick and roll and scoring 80, 90 points a game like they were for so long. I mean, that worked for them then too, but they're, like Steven said, they're not the Atlanta Hawks of a few years ago, not even close. I think the best player on that team might be the third best player on this team. I just think they've got, 3 or 4 guys that you can really count on in big moments and that have done it all year. And there's no reason to think that they can't keep doing what they've been doing.
Right. Yeah. And one other thing real quick, I've heard one of the biggest complaints is that they're going to get run off the floor defensively. Like Rudy Gobert in the playoffs is going to get run off the floor. And in certain matchups, I do think, yes, that could absolutely be the case. Like the Lakers, if they end up going against, that's going to be very tough if Anthony Davis is the matchup there. But on the other hand, like the numbers are there. They're top 5 in offensive rating. They're top 5 in defensive rating. And the last I checked, they were first in net rating. So one of the big, like when you're comparing to them to the Phoenix Suns have Cam Johnson, Mikal Bridges, a lot of really switchable, those
Jay Crowder.
Jake Crowder. Yeah. Like these guys that have length and can guard a bunch of people on the perimeter, but the Jazz, like their numbers are there. So they might be a really strong 3-point shooting team, and they might have a lot of depth that people look at and they're like, well, that's a lot of offensive depth, but where's the defense? Their defensive numbers are there. So I will be interested to see how they match up and what they do to try and hide Rudy Gobert in certain situations if he is going to get played off the court because he can't switch on certain teams. I want to see what Quinn Snyder can do to kind of hide that as best as he can, or at least kind of minimize that as best as he can. But it'll be really interesting for sure.
So Austin and I, we try to dispel that whole theory as much as we can here on the show because I'm a fan of Rudy Gobert. Austin is like a super duper mega fan. Like he has a poster of him hanging up in his room, I think.
Oh yeah, several.
But Lauren, just to kind of back up what you're saying about Rudy Gobert, I believe he's leading the last I looked, and it's been a couple days, but the last time I looked on Synergy, I don't know if you're familiar with Synergy Sports Science. It's a great website for stats and stuff like that if you're nerdy about it like Austin and I.
It is.
But he leads the league in points per possession allowed. And he has like a 200 possession advantage over as far as possessions played defensively. Over second place as far as most possessions played defensively. So it's a narrow margin, but it's still a better margin than Ben Simmons. He has a better points per possession allowed on a insurmountable lead on defensive possessions played in the season. And the whole switching thing, like I don't think it's as big a deal in Austin. I know you can speak on this a little bit more eloquently than I can, but he's actually improved his ability to step out and defend on the perimeter as time has gone on, right, Austin?
Oh, definitely. His defensive presence is felt every single time down the court. I mean, the advanced numbers on his defensive, just the difference he makes on that team when he's on the court versus off the court the last few seasons is unreal. And like Steven said, he's always at or near the top of most defensive possessions played. He's been in the focal point on more defensive possessions than just about anybody in the league since he's come in, and he's always near the top. I mean, always. And you have to watch a lot of them to really see what it is that he does, but he doesn't really switch a whole lot. He's kind of like that back line of defense. And it's to the point now where teams have tried for so long. You see teams pulling up from 6-8 feet instead of going all the way to the rim and taking floaters it was what you saw from Anthony Davis in the finals last year with the Lakers. Guys were just, he was changing shots just by standing there. And Gobert's done that for a long time. And, I think teams have tried everything they can to run him off the floor because they know his defensive value. Like the only people that were up in arms about the contract that he got this year were people that aren't actually involved with other NBA teams. Like you didn't hear any front office people or any sources or unnamed or otherwise saying, how in the world did this guy get this contract? So obviously, if he's only scoring 13 points a game, he's doing something on the other end that is just, unbelievable. And this, what Steven was alluding to about me having a poster of him in my room, I jokingly had this argument with him for months that Rudy Gobert could arguably be the most valuable player in the NBA based on how many extra possessions he gives his team on defense. And it was kind of tongue in cheek, but at the same time, I do think he is one of the most underrated players. I don't think the Jazz have any worries about his ability to do it in the playoffs any more than he done it in the regular season.
Yeah. He's so reliable. He's so reliable. He's so solid. And the guys that co-host the Home Court Press Pod, they say, and anytime I talk about the Utah Jazz, I repeat what they said because I just love it. They said, what was it? Donovan Mitchell is the Utah Jazz best player, but Rudy Gobert is by far their most important player. And that team with Rudy Gobert is, he completely changes that team and with him out there, like you said, as opposed to when he's not out there. And so, I just really like how they've constructed this team. Continuity is a thing. There is value in continuity and good coaching and chemistry. So I'm really excited to watch them. I think it'll be, and even last year when it was like Jamal, it seemed like it was just Jamal Murray versus Donovan Mitchell every single fourth quarter. And that could have easily gone the other way. It really could have. And so I'm excited to see what this team can do. They're having like a crazy, crazy year. So I want to see them also put their money where their mouth is and go impress everybody. Show them what you're made of.
All right. Yeah, Lauren, and that's all fair and good. Those are all great takes, but we're at the part of the segment now where we're going to wrap it up for the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio. But Lauren, you graciously agreed to continue on for podcast purposes. So everyone that's listening now, you can get the rest of our thoughts on the play-in, playoffs, and we're also going to get into Lauren's thoughts and opinions on the top 25 players under the age of 25. It's going to be a fun segment. She's got a little bit invested in this list being a Mavs fan. But Lauren, thank you so much for joining us for the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio. Before we close out, why don't you let the listeners know where they can follow you and your work?
Yeah, so first, thank you guys so much for having me. This has been very, very fun. You can follow, all my work is linked to my Twitter. It's at LGunn with 4 N's. My Mavs Moneyball work is linked to my Twitter. My podcast links all linked to my Twitter, and then everything that I do on the Locker Room app, which is a really fun app if anybody wants to come talk about sports, is also linked through my Twitter.
I'll have to check you out on Locker Room then for sure. I like getting on there sometimes. It is fun.
Excellent stuff. All right, so Austin, before we wrap up, I want to remind all of our listeners and viewers that they can get 20% off and free shipping with code BTG at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com and use code BTG. Unlock your confidence, and as always, use the right tools for the job with Manscaped. So, Austin, I always appreciate you. Lauren, again, thank you so much for coming on the show. Don't be a stranger. We'll have to invite you on again sometime.
It was awesome having you.
All right. So on behalf of our awesome guest, my awesome co-host, this has been the Breaking the Game show. Shout out to the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio. Go to offtheballnetwork.com for all of your sports needs. This has been the Breaking the Game show. We'll catch up with you guys next time. Much love, everybody.
Have a good one.
All right. So that's a long enough pause where I can edit that out for the podcast. So just kind of resetting the room here. We are joined by Lauren Gunn. She is the co-host of the Gunshot podcast and the Blue Hardwood, and she is also a part of SB Nation, a super awesome Mavs fan here on the show. And we're going to continue on the podcast with our top 25 players under the age of 25. Now, Lauren, have you had a chance to see ESPN's what they call article on the top 25 players? Are you familiar with this list?
Yes. So I also had it pulled up right now. There were a couple of things that were so significant that I could pull them from memory, but I do also have the list pulled up just for reference.
All right. I have it up too, so that's good. So between the two of us, we should be able to have a decent conversation about this list. So I want to just run through the list of names real quick. And then, Austin, this is going to be the first time that I get your responses to this list on the show as well. So I'm looking forward to getting your takes too. So ESPN, and I'm going to preface this because I think a lot of people kind of miss this. And even still, if you got it, it's still a little questionable of a list, but maybe you understand it more. This is heavily influenced on potential. So all these players at their absolute peak. They're under the age of 25. This is the list in order of how special and how great of a career they're going to have, according to ESPN. Number 1, Luka Doncic. I'm sure you were happy to see that one, Lauren. Zion Williamson, LaMelo Ball, number 3, Donovan Mitchell, Jason Tatum, De'Aaron Fox, Ben Simmons, Devin Booker, Bam Adebayo, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Brandon Ingram, Jaylen Brown, Jamal Murray, Michael Porter Jr., John Morant, Trae Young, Mikal Bridges, Domantas Sabonis, Anthony Edwards, DeAndre Ayton, Tyrese Halliburton, John Collins, Jarrett Allen, Lonzo Ball, and wrapping it up at number 25 was Colin Sexton. So, Lauren, what was your reaction to this list?
Well, actually kind of taking it back to something that we talked about earlier about how media drives certain narratives in order to push maybe certain agendas, I think can be somewhat problematic. I'm a big LaMelo Ball fan. Do I think he should be over Jason Tatum, Devin Booker? Like, I don't know. I don't know that I've seen enough yet. So I like him, but I'm not there yet. And so I know that this is all about potential, but I do think that there's value in what you've seen players do already and certain steps that they've taken forward. Like Devin Booker, when he came into the league, everyone was like, okay, yeah, Kentucky guard, pick 11. Woo. Like, we didn't really know what we were getting. And then it's like, oh my gosh, look at this guy go. Like, so yes, we have seen something similar with LaMelo, but there are certain players that I don't know. They've been around a little bit longer, and I do think that there's respect and value that comes with them. I think Ja Morant being 15 out of 25, I don't like that one bit. I think he needs to be a little bit higher on that list. But it's tough. Like I could go back and forth all day around a lot of these guys. I think even John Collins might even need to be up on that list a little bit. But a lot of it does have. What did you say? What was that?
No, I was saying okay. Like I'm with you.
There are certain guys who I think that they've shown not just flashes of potential, but that they're going to be able to continue to develop their game and have it go in different directions that they weren't originally maybe expected it to go. So I'm not sure. There's a lot. I could go back and forth on this all day. I really like Sabonis. Really, really like Sabonis. I think there's reason enough as to why he should be over Mikal Bridges. I think Michael Porter should probably be maybe a little bit higher on that list. It's tough. It's really tough. But yeah, I don't agree with the list. There's a lot of things that I think need to be switched on.
I think Steven, you'll know better than anybody how high I am on LaMelo Ball, and having him third on this on the ESPN list made me I haven't even read the whole list, to be completely honest. I saw some of the highlights of it, and I do have your list in front of me, but I have a question for you guys since you have the other one up. Did Michael Porter Jr., was he on their top 25?
Yeah.
He is.
He was. Okay.
I think he was 14, if I'm not mistaken.
14? Okay.
Yep.
That makes me feel better. I thought for some reason I didn't hear you say him, and I thought he wasn't on the list. And to be totally honest, Sabonis, you guys both said a lot of nice things about him. I am from Indianapolis. I do, by kind of default, follow a lot of Pacers news. And I'll be completely honest with you. He puts up really good numbers. He's fun to watch, but it doesn't really translate in terms of wins and losses. The team tends to be every bit the same when he's not out there. And so that says something to me about it. But I mean, neither list is bad, Steven. I'm looking at yours now. Yours is awesome. I know I told you that before.
I appreciate that.
There needs to be quite as much projection as apparently what ESPN was putting into their list, because I mean, Jason Tatum is as good or better than anybody that you named out of the 25 guys you named, other than maybe Luka Doncic and maybe eventually Zion. And Zion might already be there. I don't know. Those two guys are kind of, to me, in a class of their own. I think I would have Tatum probably third. But I also think Michael Porter Jr. the sky's the limit for that guy too. I think we're going to see now with, I hate seeing Murray get injured. I think it's a terrible thing. But I told you off the air, Steven, I think for them in the long run, it could be a blessing in disguise. It gives them a whole year where there's not going to be as many expectations without Murray coming. going into next season, you can almost expect he's going to miss most, if not all, of next year. So they get a whole season with Michael Porter Jr. basically as their number 2 option. And I just think to win titles in the NBA, you need a wing player with the size and playmaking ability that he has, which is, if you look down your list, Steven, all of these guys are even the ones that are guards, are big guards that have size. Devin Booker is the first guy on your list that doesn't stick out as a guy with really great positional size, and he's not little. And how in the world do you have LaMelo Ball, who's played half a season in a weird season too, under no real pressure, with no real stakes whatsoever, never really had to worry about how good they did, because even if he is considered the guy who has to lead that team, no one expects them to win right now. And I mean, we've heard for a couple seasons now that Devin Booker needs to take this team to needs to take the next step and prove he can win and all this. And he's done that. And, Trae Young's doing that in Atlanta. Donovan Mitchell's doing that in Utah. And they're out there night after night. We've seen these guys do it in the playoffs, or at least with some of them. Donovan Mitchell showed last year in the playoffs against Jamal Murray how special he can be on offense. And, however you want to look at it, however you want to break it down, Steven, I think your list, to me at least, makes a lot more sense. But no matter what you want to say about the lists, is the NBA is in incredibly good hands, if you ask me. I think there's a lot to be excited about in the future.
Yeah, and so, Lauren, what I'm going to do, let me see if I can do this. All right, here we go. So I'm going to share my list. This is on offtheballnetwork.com, where you can get all of your sports needs. This is my list here, and so I'm not going to read it all, but I have my kind of logic behind the list take here. And basically, I called out like what is potential. Like when you turn 25, does your potential run out? Obviously, that's kind of a silly statement, because Jimmy Butler, Julius Randle, players like that who, keep adding to their game over and over and over again. So I don't suspect for any reason that a guy who is like a couple months away from being 25 should be held at a different level of potential and things like that. And I did hold accolades and kind of prove it stuff to my list, Lauren. So hopefully you kind of agree a little bit more with my list, but if not, pick me apart. It'll make me a better analyst. So I do agree that Luka Doncic is number 1. I think that that's an easy decision. I have Jason Tatum second. I have Zion Williamson third. I have Jaylen Brown fourth, because I value what he does defensively. And he has shown that he can be a go-to scorer this season. He's proved that this year. I have Devin Booker fifth, Donovan Mitchell sixth, Trae Young seventh, Bam Adebayo eighth, Brandon Ingram ninth, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander 10th, Ben Simmons 11th, De'Aaron Fox 12th, Ja Morant 13th, Jamal Murray 14th, Michael Porter Jr. 15th, LaMelo Ball 16th, Domantas Sabonis 17th, OG Anunoby, who wasn't on ESPN's list, I have him at 18. Tyrese Halliburton at 19, had John Collins at 20. DeAndre Hunter from the Atlanta Hawks, who wasn't on ESPN's list at all, I have him 21. DeAndre Ayton at 22, Lonzo Ball 23, RJ Barrett, who wasn't on the list at all, at 24. And my 25th pick, Lauren, I'm just going to go ahead and let you know this was heavily influenced by potential. I had him as the number 1 pick in this last draft, and advanced stats went into my play here. If you got someone else at 25, I'm not going to be mad. And then I also, just real quick, made a statement that anyone between 12th and 17th, it's here on my statement for De'Aaron Fox. I could have gone either way with a lot of those, but this is kind of how I viewed and valued them for the time being right now. So, Lauren, after kind of hearing my list and seeing a little bit of it, how do you feel about where I have players ranked? Did you see any significant gripes or where you would shuffle players around?
No, I like what you said about 12 through 17 could easily be. I mean, you can make a case on a lot of these different guys to maybe move them around. I think when I look at some of these players, it's hard to look at where are they playing, what's their role within that team, and how does that differentiate them on these lists. because I'm very high on John Morant. I probably would have had, I mean, I don't know, maybe like 10 or 9. Because when
I have on my list, by the way, I said that I have him at 13, and I hate that I have him there. I think that he's just got so much stuff to his game that he should be higher. But I have a hard time finding anything definitively to point at to suggest that he should be. Like, he does have kind of like that intangible quality about his game that like my heart wants to put him so much higher. I didn't have anything to point at.
Right. And I mean, there are so many guys that show that they can do so many different things. Like what you said with Jaylen Brown is a perfect example about how he came to the league and he was one thing, like coming out of Cal, and then he comes in and he shows that he's willing and able to take this step up and just be this go-to guy on both ends of the floor. And Bam, nobody even really knows what Bam is because he's so special. He's so unique. He's got so much talent. And Miami without Bam, like, not that they're like bad without Bam, but like he's so huge. He's such a huge part of that team. So it's really hard to say, oh, top or 25 under 25. Like there's potential. There's most important. There's, well, how's their potential going to grow given the role that they're in, given the state of their team? You know, like the Mavs are trying to win. There are some other teams who are kind of maybe more in the rebuild. And so it's really hard to differentiate there. But yeah, I mean, like Austin said, the league is in really, really good hands. And some of these young players, it's crazy what they can do and how they're going to continue to change the game. Like some of these guys, they do things differently than what we've seen. And so I can't wait to see where things go because these guys, they're for real, man. They're so fun.
I think if you look at it from terms of, okay, these two guys that you have, which one's better? Trade them for each other and see how the other would fare in the other's situation. I think there's something to be said about that in just terms of thinking about it, because I think if you put some of the guys that are really high on ESPN's list, you know, switch them with a Devin Booker and put them in Phoenix with Chris Paul, are they going to be anywhere near? Is LaMelo Ball going to be as successful with that team as Booker is right now? I don't think so, because Booker's their number one scoring option, and that's what they need from him. They wouldn't need the kind of playmaking all around thing that LaMelo can bring. And at the same time, we've never seen him with any pressure on him whatsoever. So I just think having a guy that's played half a season like that high on that list, I think is going to kind of discredit it to a lot of people. Now, in a couple of years, I could, eat my words and LaMelo Ball could be in the running for the MVP. Who knows? But right now, I think it's pretty obvious just looking at the list and without even looking up any numbers or anything, like the names and what they bring to mind on Steven's list, the order makes a lot more sense than the other list. Just like when I think of, okay, who are the top 5 young stars in the NBA? LaMelo Ball doesn't come to mind. Not really to me. And he might soon, but I feel like some spots they were trying to be like different than what everybody maybe thought they were going to say and project out something that nobody else was saying. And I get that for sure. Like Steven knows I write some stuff sometimes just to get a rise out of reaction out of people, just to stir the pot. Yeah. And to be honest, they're the most successful articles usually that I put out. So there is something to be said about just, saying something a little bit outlandish sometimes. But that goes back to what we talked about earlier. Is it responsible to just put out whatever for a top 25 list? And, I like Anunoby just as much as you too, Stephen. I was pretty surprised to see that he wasn't on there. I don't think they took, two-way guys into account a whole lot if he was left off, because I'd be hard pressed to find a guy, in my opinion, that's much better on both sides of the ball at that age.
It hurt me so much not to put Gary Trent Jr. in there, because I'm a big fan of what he's doing, and
he's our guy now. If you didn't know, Lauren, he kind of became our guy all of a sudden.
I like it.
We were saying that Portland should have gave him the Tyler Hero treatment that Miami has given him. Like, don't trade him unless it's like something stupid.
Why in the
stellar
world they traded him for another expiring contract of a guy that has no reason to stay there? And they if the money was the issue, they don't have the money to keep him either. Like,
it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me either. My brother, when we first were like kind of breaking down the trade deadline, he was like, not that, like, I know age comes into this, and there are so many things that go into this, but you didn't really, there wasn't a whole lot of, like, he didn't really, it was a kind of a lateral movement. Like, you didn't really address what you needed to address, and it it might be a very short-term move. So I don't get it.
Yeah, to me, if anything, like they got less versatile.
And they had other things that were more important that they could have tried to address from a trade standpoint than, like you said, going for a guy that plays basically the same position and numbers aren't much different, except he's a little bit older and a little bit more expensive and doesn't have history here with these players at all. So you have even less of a chance of keeping him long term.
A little smaller, a little worse defender. So
right. And the defense is something they sorely need.
Yeah. Well, Lauren, I just want to thank you so much for your time and even, obviously the extra time that you gave us for the podcast. I want to encourage everyone who had an opportunity to watch and listen to please go follow Lauren and her work. It's great stuff. I'm new to following it, but I'm definitely going to be plugged in more and more. And Lauren, we'd love to have you back, down the line. So please don't be a stranger to the show.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for having me. This has been awesome.
All righty. Well,
you've been an awesome guest.
Thank you.
All right. Well, so for Austin, for Lauren, for myself, for all of our great sponsors and network affiliations that we have, this has been the Breaking the Game show. We'll catch up with you guys next time. Much love, everybody.
You guys have a good one.